So when I first started trying to really get into fitness and get like jacked and all that stuff, I used to, rely on the calorie counting stuff and just like hitting my protein and that sort of like bodybuilding nutrition advice. And I followed that for a while. I remember my protein sources was mostly this kind of like nutrient depleted garbage that tasted like was artificially flavored and whatnot. It was stuff like, like the average whey protein, like the scoops, like the freaking. I think at one point I had like a birthday cake flavor. I also remember having like I mostly did a vanilla and I had like, I put like cinnamon in it and I had like all this like super fancy stuff in it to make it taste super good and like creamy and all this stuff. I also remember I thought the pinnacle of nutrition was like chicken breasts, rice, and broccoli. I remember that was kind of like the ideal meal that I didn't have very often, but I was like, oh yeah, like this is gonna make me jacked if I eat this. I remember that kind of with a little bit of nostalgia, but as I've as I got older and I started learning more about just how food works in general, I started realizing that most of firstly, the processed food that I was eating, whether that was like the protein bars and the protein shakes, and it was, it was a lot of those things that I realized, like, what am I doing eating these things? Like, this isn't real food. Like, yeah, it's protein and stuff, but that's not, it's not good. And it doesn't have like any nutrients in it whatsoever that will actually make me like a healthier human being. I remember as I transitioned off that to eating like more real food, like more meat, more plants, whatever, like more like whole single ingredient foods, I started feeling a lot better just digestively. My energy started going up and my protein intake was basically the same. Like my I was still worried about like, oh my gosh, my protein, my protein. I was still worried about that, but it stayed basically the same. And I continued on that path of just learning more about nutrient dense foods and the nutrients and anti-nutrients and stuff like plants and like carbohydrates and protein and fat and whatnot, like just learning about all those sorts of things. And it led me to start to eat even more meat, to eat more eggs, and to really reduce the amount of plants that I consume in my diet until a point now to where I actually don't eat any plants. I mostly just eat meat and eggs now. And the limit of like plant material that gets into my diet now is maybe some spices that like slip in here or there, but it's very rarely that I have that now. But yeah, but I would say that throughout that transition, my life has gotten significantly better from just eating more meat and eating less of other stuff. And that's what I want to share with you today is just how eating more meat has changed my life for the better and just kind of like my recommendation, my opinion on it, and just kind of my story basically. So I've already told you a little bit of it, but if you don't know me, my name is Keegan and I talk about like diet and fitness and whatnot. So if you want to go subscribe, then I'd greatly appreciate that. But yeah, just whenever I started transitioning into a more meat-based diet and, increasing my fat intake and increasing the amount of protein that I ate, not from the freaking like protein protein shakes and um all that nonsense, just like eating like real food that is high in fat, high in protein, and lower in carbohydrates, less plants, that sort of thing. As I've started to do that more and more now to where I basically don't have anything, right? I've gotten more energy. My cognitive function has gotten a lot better. My digestion has gotten a lot better. And so, actually, let me specify that for you a little bit more, especially on the digestion part. So, as I was growing up, I always remember having this kind of like weird, kind of gross feeling in my stomach quite often, kind of like this like bloated, really full feeling stomach, and that lasting for hours and hours and hours. And now that doesn't happen anymore unless I've eaten like a really big meal, but that's still kind of avoidable, if you know what I mean, just like kind of like spreading out the food a little bit more. I like eating a lot of food, and so sometimes I'll eat like a really big bolus of food that probably isn't the smartest thing, but like it doesn't like hurt like it used to. It used to just be really uncomfortable just walking around and just kind of like existing after eating even like a moderately sized meal, that it just like it didn't digest as well because there was like less digestible stuff in there. Something that I've learned is that fiber isn't actually a nutrient because you can't digest it, you can't break it down. And so it's just a thing. It's like it's indigestible material that just goes through your tract and then you poop it out on the other end. And that's what happened a lot for me because I always had this belief in my mind that, oh, I need to eat this broccoli or I need to eat this. I was never really a big salad guy, to be honest, but sometimes I would. I was like, oh, eat this salad, or eat, I don't know, these vegetables, whatever it was. I always had that belief like, oh, this is good for me. I need to have this. But I would just eat it and I would just poop it out on the other end. Like I wouldn't absorb any of it. And it was actually very difficult for me to digest that. Well, one, because it's like impossible to digest fiber, but also because of it blocks the absorption of other stuff, blocks the breakdown of other stuff, right? So you're just overall, I think it just disrupts the digestion, and I found that it's harder to digest stuff whenever there's plant matter involved. It's actually kind of weird, actually. I think it was like a couple weeks ago, my mom made this roast, and I wasn't gonna say no to a roast, right? Like, of course, I'm gonna have like a roast, but I'm not gonna eat like the vegetables along with it. The problem though is that there was some sort of like spices, or like it's like sage or like thyme or whatever that she had put on the top, and just some other like general spices or whatever that she had put on the meat. And I'm not gonna go through the trouble of like scraping off every single little leaf thing on the roast. Like I'm just gonna eat the roast. It's not that big of a deal for me. But I found that night, normally, if I eat around the same amount of meat, right, it generally gets digested relatively quickly. But on that night specifically, and I get this is just an anecdote, but that night, whenever I had the meat with just the spices, like just the spices level on it, it was a lot harder to digest. Like it just took longer to go through the system. Like it doesn't take that long for other stuff of the same quantity that doesn't have the spices on it to go through the system. So I was kind of confused, and I thought like, oh, well, it has to be that then. Like that's the only other variable that really changed significantly. Like I didn't drink that much water that might have slowed down the digestion. I didn't do anything else that much differently. So it's probably the spices. And yeah, anyways, that's just an anecdote. But I found that as I've reduced the amount of plants that I've eaten and just increased the amount of meat, my digestion has gotten way better. And that has made a lot of difference in my life. So if you ever struggle with digestion, then I'd really suggest this. Really try it out and see how it works for you. Just try removing some plants, maybe all plants if you want, and just see how that goes for you. Like for me, it has been a very beneficial change to my life, and I enjoy it a lot. Um, Another thing that I've found benefited me from changing my diet to more meat based is my mental energy, and just my general energy has gone up a whole lot. And I really like that. As a dude who, I would say I'm relatively smart, relatively intelligent, maybe that's debatable. But I just like being able to think straight, being able to, think and not have this kind of like weird headache and this weird feeling in my head of brain fog and just like low energy and low mood. I used to have that a lot whenever I was eating carbohydrates and eating more plants. My mind was just very, it was all over the place, like energy wise. And I found now that it's a lot more stable and generally at a higher baseline, which I find to be very beneficial. I really enjoy it. Unless, of course, I get like a bad night's sleep, in which case that's going to affect anyone, though. So, yeah. Um, that's about it, though. It's just kind of like the energy, better digestion, nutrient density. Meat is something that I've learned is that meat is one of the most nutrient dense things that you can possibly eat. And you know how people say like, oh, like vegetables have this mineral or this vitamin in it. Yeah, it's cool, but from something that I've learned though is that plants have uh, chemicals in them that kind of keep you from absorbing those vitamins and minerals. Like meat, you can get basically like 90-95%, probably more of the nutrients that you get from that, but from eating that, right? Like you eat it, you absorb a majority of it, but the plants you don't. And in some cases, they'll actually take nutrients from you. I remember seeing this one study that had a graph where it was like 100 grams of oysters and comparing that and combining it with other foods and seeing like the amount of zinc that you get, because apparently oysters have a lot of zinc in them. And so like zinc is this mineral that is pretty good. I think it's for like testosterone, thyroid. It's good for a lot of things, right? And it showed this graph of, I think it was how much zinc you absorbed. And so it was just regular oysters had this like high level on the graph, and then there's two other bars, and one of them was oysters with corn tortillas, and it was just like completely flat. It was at the zero mark. Like you absorbed basically nothing if you had oysters with the corn tortillas, compared to having just the oysters. Like your zinc was like so much lower. Your zinc absorption was so much lower. And yeah, so that's another thing, is just the nutrient density in meat in general is just way better. And that's probably why I found, it's better digesting, better energy, better cognitive function. It's because I'm just getting more nutrients by eating more meat and that sort of thing. And not getting freaking seed oils and other garbage with the protein shakes and the and the protein bars and whatnot anymore. But yeah. But finally, all of that aside, I'd say that how eating more meat has changed my life. If I want to put it into a nutshell, I would say it's just less, my life is less whack. I have like less whack symptoms, like the digestion, the low energy, etc. And I eat like a king every day. Regardless of what I eat, I feel like I'm eating like a king. I don't eat steaks every day, mind you, right? Like I'm not super bougie like that. I don't eat steaks every day. I eat some burgers. I eat eggs, chicken, pork, like relatively inexpensive things, inexpensive cuts of meat. But I still feel like I eat like a king every day because it tastes so good. And I know it is helping my body recover and do all the other things that I want to do in my life. And so that is how eating more meat has changed my life. So I would recommend to you to just eat more meat and eat less plants. That's how I would say it. If anything, eat less junk food. Like I can yap on about how meat is great and everything, but if you're still eating junk food, like you should probably cut that out first. Because junk food is just absolutely terrible for you. I don't know why anyone would eat junk food. Like I get it, it's tasty and all that, but it's not good for your life. Like I never gained any benefit from eating junk food, and I don't think you do either. So I think we should all just, as a community, as a human species, just in general, just like cut out junk food because that's the worst thing ever. But my advice to you: eat more meat, eat less plants, see how it goes for you, see how you feel. If you think I'm crazy, okay, cool. But you've made it this far in the video, so top 1% attention span, regardless of who you are. So thank you for watching this far, and go try it out. See how you feel. So thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Make sure to do all the YouTube stuff. Bye-bye.